Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it very much. You know, we always turn our attention, especially during these special legislative sessions, where we can get more information from the people who represent us. And so very glad to have with us State Representative Beryl Amedee. Beryl, thank you so much for taking some time with us today.
Sure. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity.
All right. And so again, this unique session, this override session, you guys took place this week and finished out today. And so I know it was an interesting time. I know it's a unique situation, and we talked about that a little bit, but maybe we can talk about some of the bills that were up for the option to override.
Sure. Well, the one that got the bulk of the attention was, of course, the bill that was called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. And that's the one bill that both the House and the Senate did vote on in this very brief override session. The Senate voted yesterday, and it got exactly the number of votes it needed to be able to be overridden and come on over to the House. The House picked up the bill this afternoon, and personally, I'm disappointed that the override stands. We were 2 votes short of overturning the governor's override. And so the governor's veto, I'm sorry. And so that bill now has officially not passed, and we will have to consider bringing up the same argument next year. There were many other topics that the bills that were vetoed, there were close to 30 bills vetoed, and some of those topics had been top topics that the voters wanted us to consider when we came in last session. If you remember, election integrity was a real hot topic, still is. We had some bills that were vetoed that would have protected election integrity or strengthened it, and we did not even hear those bills in the House, because I think the 2 that were vetoed were in the Senate, and they didn't get enough votes. So the veto stands, and the House did not get to discuss or debate those during this session. Another hot topic was constitutional carry, a Second Amendment bill. That bill that was vetoed was a Senate bill, and it also failed to get enough votes to come over to the House. So here again, we didn't have the opportunity to discuss and debate and consider overriding that veto here in the House. So that was disappointing. And in the House, some of the bills that originated with us had to do with health, with the vaccine passports that we keep hearing about, and the ability to protect some of that information. Today, we did not hear those bills, and so the veto stands. Another one had to do with transparency in spending for local school districts. That bill passed with flying colors, and it got vetoed, and once again, we didn't get to hear that one today. And even though, from what I'm hearing, the vast majority of school districts have already come out and publicly said, we're fine with the bill. In fact, many of them are already doing what the bill required, which is it's kind of like Louisiana checkbook, where they put their expenses, the things that they've paid, they put that online so that the public can look and see where the tax money goes and how it's being allotted within the school system. So it's disappointing to me that we didn't even have the opportunity to really discuss, debate, and then vote on whether to overturn the governor's vetoes of these bills. I felt these are important to our citizens. These are some of the topics that people speak with me about when I'm out in my district. And that's why when it came down to it, in the last moments of the session, when the motion was made to end the session sine die, and we took a vote in the House, that motion did pass with 84 votes, but I was one of the members who voted no. And it's simply because I feel that a veto override session is what the law provides for the function, the proper function of 3 distinct branches of government. And so even though this is the first time we come into a veto override session, it would have been good if we had continued and followed through with all that the law allows and give each of the vetoes its due process. So I think we made history We had the veto override session. We set some policy. Now we have set the mold, so we don't have to recreate everything anytime in the future that we want to call another override session. So I don't think that we'll wait another 50 years before we have the next one. Of course, that'll really depend on the actions of our current governor and future governors.
Yeah, and how that goes. And so what it sounds like is some of those things you didn't even have an option to vote on, and that's a little disappointing. And the one thing that you did have a chance to vote on, something that was really near and dear to your heart, to be able to really get reversed in the veto, was the issue as it relates to fairness in women's sports. And I know that one did come, and it failed by 2 votes. And so we only got about 30 seconds left, but just kind of how you feel about that, and maybe how we move forward with that. We look at that maybe again next year?
Sure, I'm willing. As you might remember, that bill today was a Senate bill, but in the last session, I actually brought the House version of that same bill, which was identical. And because my bill failed in committee, the public cried out, and that's why we were able to finally eventually pass the Senate version. And we got all the way to today, where we voted whether to override the governor's veto of that bill, and it failed by 2 votes.
Just 2
and
votes.
I believe it was because of the extreme pressure that the governor was putting on members,
Yep.
especially some members of the House Democrats.
Yep.
And 10 people changed their votes. 10 people who had voted for the bill during session voted against it today or weren't here.
I've been talking about how unique this situation is, how unique this veto override session is. Was it a little different coming into session today? And maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. This was very different, actually. We have never, in the history of our current state constitution, had a veto override session. So we had a little bit of framework in our laws and in our policy for the House and Senate, but we really didn't have a whole lot to go on. So we've been talking for days about what are the procedures going to be. We really wanted to try and understand the proper everything, the proper motions that needed to be made, the proper order to take things in, because we really didn't have anything to go on.
Yeah, so this was a unique experience overall, so that we see that there wasn't much to, like you said, nothing to go on. We've never done it before, and so there was obviously some kind of not necessarily disarray, but just the flow or the process was probably very different from what you've been used to.
Yes, and some of the things that are unique to a veto override session as opposed to any other regular session that we go into are that we are simply handling whether or not to uphold or reject the governor's veto. So that means that the bills are done. The bills do not change. They don't go through a committee process. There is no possibility of amending a bill. So that's why we were able to move quickly for the bills that were handled, mostly in the Senate. We were able to move quickly because it's pretty much a one-shot thing. We're only talking about whether or not to override a veto.
And normally you would have a lot of those changes taking place. There would be some amendments, there would be some tweaking, if you will, to the process and or the bill, so that it would be a little bit more digestible, a little bit easier, or somebody would agree to it if you put these terms in versus something else. This one was very different.
That's right. Normally, as a bill is making its way through the process, that's the whole point of the process, so that we can all come together and discuss and debate and try out different ideas, so that when the bill moves through, our goal is to have the bill crafted with the best language possible, that it's going to do what we want it to do, that it won't have any unintended consequences, that hopefully we can avoid lawsuits. So none of that was necessary this session, because every bill had the same simple question: to either uphold or reverse the governor's veto.
And so it's really interesting. I know very often there are lobbyists, there are people that are talking with you guys, kind of pulling you out of session and talking with you a little bit. None of that took place this time, but was there any discussion amongst the legislatures themselves about the bills and about the bills that were up for veto review? There
was a little discussion here and there, because although, of course, the bills have not changed at all since we got out of session, there was a discussion among members because certain arguments may have been raised about a bill. And so members had to decide whether they were going to hold to their original vote or change their original vote concerning the bill based on if there was any new information, any new argument that came to light since we left the session. So there was some discussion. Very few lobbyists, just a few coming in and out who I suppose were following specifically bills that had been vetoed. With such a small number of bills, there really wasn't a lot of necessity for a lot of lobbyists because they tend to come based on topics, and we only had a short list of topics.
And, you know, it's so very interesting. I know, you know, as we're looking at these uncharted waters, I was just kind of wondering what the feel was or coming in if each of the legislatures, either both in House and Senate, were just kind of in a unique place coming in. Y'all had just left just a few weeks ago, and y'all see each other again. In fact, that was something that we saw right at the end as things were closing. Somebody forgot to say bye to everybody, and he wanted to say, you know, tell everybody how much he had missed them.
Yes, that was now Senator Gary Carter. He had an election. He ran in a special election. So during the session that we just finished a few weeks ago, he was a House member. During the veto session, he's a Senate member. And he didn't get to give a going away speech because of the timing of the election.
Kind of unique to his situation, right? That doesn't normally happen like
Yes.
that very often. I know everybody, when you kind of closed, were really we're really happy about the end of the session that you just had. Was that the same kind of feel when y'all closed, as we just have about 30 seconds here left, when y'all finished here today?
I don't think that everybody was happy with the outcome. Some people may have been, but I think that everybody was just happy to be able to once again go home.
Mm. Yeah, and quite frankly, it's one of those things where this was different. You had to go back. A lot of people, you know, are away from their families again when it wasn't necessarily planned. And so that was just one of those things. It was just a little bit unique and different. And so we're always very thankful and glad that y'all are spending the time that you are there representing us. And I know District 51 is very glad to have you representing them. And so we always appreciate your time. So thank you for taking a little time with us. We'll hope to talk with you again a little more about maybe some of the reaction and results.
Sure, it's an honor to serve and always a pleasure to be here and let you know what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Beryl.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. And again, that's State Representative District 51, Beryl Amedee. We appreciate her time as always. All right, we're going to take a short break, and don't go anywhere. More local programming when we return.